Hello everyone, it's Wendy. Welcome to my channel and to the Knitters Classroom series. With this series, you will be able to master the skills you need to go from being an absolute beginner to a proficient knitter who can create more advanced items from a written pattern. Each video lesson in the series will cover one or more skills, followed up with a pattern you can use to put them into practice. In this Lesson 1 video, I will introduce you to the basic knitting supplies and teach you how to cast on, do the knit stitch, and cast off. Then I will show you how to use those 3 basic skills to make a simple hat you will be proud to wear. I'm going to assume that you've never even picked up a pair of knitting needles before, so the first thing we need to know is the ABCs of needles and of yarn. You may have noticed that needles have different numbers on them, and this can be really confusing. And the reason it can be confusing is because there are 3 different ways to number knitting needles, and once you understand them, it gets a lot simpler. You'll see on this pair, it says US 6 and 4 millimeter. Those 2 different numbers both refer to needles of this size. They're clearly marked 4 millimeter on the top here, and this pair is marked 5 millimeter. And that refers to the diameter of the needle. Okay, so if I put it on a measuring tool like this, it measures 5 millimeters across. However, some needles will have a different number on them. So these ones, for example, say number 5. Well, clearly, they're not the same size as this. So they're not a 5 millimeter, but what they are is a US number 5. One way to figure this out is to use a knitting needle chart like this one from VogueKnitting.com, which will tell you the comparison between the metric sizes, the US sizes, and the old UK sizes, which in my little measuring tool here is actually called a Canadian size. So this tool will also measure the size of the needles. The American sizes are listed on the right-hand side, the UK ones or Canadian ones on the left-hand side, and metric on the other side. And to use this tool, you simply put your needle in the hole until you find the one that fits the best. So in this case, my needle is 3 3/4 millimeter, and if I turn it over, it's a number 5 American size. So something like this, you can even pick these up at the dollar store or Michael's or Walmart, wherever you're shopping for your yarn supplies, and that will be invaluable to you. I would recommend for a beginner that you pick up a pair of metal knitting needles, not plastic ones. The plastic ones tend to be quite flexible and the yarn doesn't slide very well on them. They just get annoying. So get something a little better, get a metal one. And that doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of money. This gold pair and blue pair I actually got at a thrift store. So you could try that if you want to be economical about it. And you'll also notice that the blue pair on the right here is much shorter than this pair on the left. Why would that be? Well, some people prefer to hold their knitting needles just on their lap in their hands like so. And in that case, a short one is handy. You can do that with these longer ones too, but the other option with these longer ones is to tuck the needle under your arm. So just tuck the end of it right in your armpit, and that almost helps you to have a third hand to hold onto your needle, which you might find helpful as a beginner. The other option is to use a circular needle. You'll see here I'm working back and forth on this needle, which has a shorter needle, about 5 inches long, on either end of a cable. So it's called a circular needle because it forms a circle, of course. And I would recommend that you try one of these as well. You might find that it's more comfortable for you. This is my preference for knitting. I go back and forth or make circular items on these kind of needles. So once you get started on knitting, you might want to try a few different types of needles and see which one works for you. But when your pattern calls for a certain number or a certain size, make sure that you understand whether they're asking for millimeters, so a metric needle, or they're asking for an American sized needle. If you're lucky, the needle will have both markings on it so that you'll be able to confirm. And if, like with this circular needle, it doesn't have any kind of a marking on it, just use your gauge to find out which size of needle this is. So in this case, this one is a 5 millimeter or a number 8 American size. Okay, so hopefully that takes out some of the confusion in choosing your needles. The standard is getting to be millimeters. So a lot of times patterns nowadays will be written with the millimeter or sometimes with both. It'll say US 5 and 3 3/4 millimeter. Figuring out what yarn your pattern is calling for can also be confusing, but the key is to look at the label. And it's also really helpful to have a chart like this one, which I will link in the description below, that explains the different weights or thicknesses of yarn. For the lesson today, I'll be using this Bernat Maker yarn. And if you turn it around, it will give you the manufacturer, it'll give you the dye lot and the color number, and then it also gives you a label that shows a number of different pieces of information about this yarn. You can see here that it's a cotton and nylon blend, and there's 250 grams or 8.8 ounces of yarn. So that's the weight of the entire ball, is this 250 grams. It also tells you approximately how long this yarn is. If you were to take it out of the ball and stretch it out completely, it would give you 317 yards roughly, or 290 meters. So when your pattern asks for, let's say 500 grams of yarn, you would only need 2 of these. But if you had a skein that was only 100 grams of yarn, you would need 5 of those. So it's important to know the overall weight of the ball. But also when we're talking about weight of yarn, we're talking about the thickness of it. So in this case, I have a number 5 or bulky yarn. Yarns have numbers and they also have names. And that can be confusing as well. So this yarn is a number 4 yarn. It says medium. Another way to refer to a number 4 yarn is a worsted weight yarn. Again, if you look at the chart, you will see that each of these numbered skeins at the top has a name to go with it. So bulky, worsted, DK for double knit, and so on. And that refers to the thickness of the yarn. You can clearly see that this number 5 yarn is a thicker yarn than this number 4 yarn, which in turn is a thicker yarn than this baby yarn, which is a number 3 yarn marked light, or sometimes it could be called sport or DK. They're all different weights. So a number 3, a number 5, a number 4, those are the important numbers to know on your yarn. The label also tells you roughly what size of needle you would need to get a good result with this yarn. So it's telling you here that an 8 millimeter or US 11, we just talked about those sizes, will give you a good result of this yarn. And in a plain stockinette stitch, we'll come to that later, you would get 13 stitches and 17 rows with this yarn and that needle size. It also tells you what crochet hook size, and again the rows and the stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. So if you made a square that was 4 inches by 4 inches, you would get 13 stitches and 17 rows in a stockinette stitch fabric with an 8mm needle. There are also washing instructions on the label and sometimes some written instructions to tell you how to take care of this garment that you're making with this yarn. Now you may be thinking at this point, great, those numbers are really helpful, but I bought my yarn from an independent dyer at a yarn sale and it doesn't have any number like that. This is where your chart's going to come in handy again. So for example, with this wool yarn here, it says DK on it. Looking at my chart, I can see that DK is the same as a number 3 yarn. If I use a number 3 yarn when a pattern calls for a number 4 yarn, my item is going to come out a little bit smaller because the yarn is finer. It's a lighter weight, so it's really important to match the yarn to what the pattern calls for. This yarn also doesn't have a number, but it does have a name, Sock Fingering. So both of those refer to a number 1, a very lightweight yarn. This one's even lighter. This is a lace weight. Often people would put something like these two together because this is very fine, but you could make a beautiful shawl with that. It is marked lace weight on the label. This one tells us it's worsted. And again, worsted is another name for a number 4 yarn. So rely on your chart and you'll be able to figure out what the weight of your yarn is or the thickness of it. For your very first project and for practicing, I'm going to recommend that you get a pair of 5mm needles, either straight ones like this or a circular needle, or preferably one of each just to see what you like better. And also some smooth, light colored, plain yarn. I would perhaps a jersey yarn like this one. If you look at it up close, it looks kind of like t-shirt fabric. Or something like this Caron Blossom Cakes, which is a medium number 4 weight yarn. It's a cotton acrylic blend, or perhaps a nice wool or wool blend. But the key is it should be a fairly smooth yarn in a light color so you can see your stitches. It doesn't split very easily. I would strongly recommend that you avoid fuzzy, bumpy, chenille blanket type yarns or any dark colors where it's hard to see your stitches. It will really help to reduce frustration as you're learning. You will need just one ball or skein of yarn to make your practice project for this first video, which is a hat. But let's start with just learning the basics here. So starting at the very beginning. So find the end of your yarn, whether you take it from the inside of the ball or the outside, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes when you try and pull from the inside, you end up with a big yarn barf like I did here and you have to untangle it all, but that's okay. Whatever works. Very first thing we need to do is to make a slip stitch to put the yarn on the needle. So to do that, I'm going to make a loop in my yarn like so. You'll see it looks like a small letter E. The end that goes to the ball is lying on the top. The short end is underneath where it's crossed over. What I'm going to do is put my fingers in between this loop and grab the end that's attached to the ball, grab the short end with my other finger, and pull it through. So you can see it makes like a knot with one end that comes out and goes back through the knot. That's a slip knot. I'll show you that again. We're making a loop, putting the long end into the loop and grabbing it and pulling it like so. That makes your slip stitch, and when I pull on one end of the yarn, that stitch can get bigger or smaller. So taking that loop, I'm going to put that on the needle like so and pull it until it's snug around the needle. Okay. Holding that needle in my left hand, I'm going to make some more stitches on my needle. If you were left-handed, you would hold this one in your right hand. If you're right-handed, then your working needle is your right needle, and the one that you're working off of is your left needle. To make the first stitch, I'm going to take the pointed end of the needle in my right hand and put it into the stitch next to the other needle. So you can see that I've put it into that first stitch right beside the other needle, underneath it. Okay? Then I'm going to take the long end, the end that's attached to the ball, wrap it around and under the back and over the needle. Okay, so we're going clockwise around the back and to the front. Many people make the mistake of going over top of the needle, going counterclockwise, but it's really important for the construction of the stitches to go clockwise. Then I'm going to hold the yarn against the needle with my thumb, not so tight that I can't, that I have to fight with it. But now I'm going to tip my needles out, put my finger on the end of that right hand needle so that yarn doesn't slip right off the end like so. Okay, again, going clockwise, finger on the end of this one, tip the needles out, and use that right needle to scoop the yarn right through the stitch, like so. Okay? Excuse the noise, my husband's doing some construction downstairs. Pull up a loop that's about 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch long. Hang on to that loop with your finger. Scoop under the front of it with the left hand needle and slide it off. So just rewind if you need to see how to do that again. Now I'm going to put the needle now in between those two stitches. Only on the first one do we go into the stitch. This is called a cable cast on. So we're going to put the needle in between the stitches. If you look at the end, you'll see it's under both sides of that stitch. Okay, so it's right in between them. Either setting the right end of the bottom end of the right hand needle on the table or tucking it under your arm, whatever you need to do so it doesn't slide right out. Take the long end attached to the ball. Again, wrap it clockwise. Take it down and hold it against the needle. Slide toward the end and use the right hand needle, putting your finger on it if you need to scoop that stitch right through to the front. Stretch it out so it's about 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter long. Take your left hand needle, put it into the stitch over the top and slide it off. Now you've got 3. We're going to keep doing that. Put it in between the stitch like so. And you shouldn't have to fight to put it in there. If you do, you've made it too tight. So just loosen it up a bit. Wrap it around the back clockwise. hold onto the thread and the right hand needle. Put your thumb on the, or your finger on the right hand needle on the tip, scoop it to the front, pull up a loop, pull it to the right, take your left needle and scoop that one off. Insert the right needle between the stitches, scooch them down so that they're not falling off the end. Wrap around, grab the right needle, pinching that yarn in between, scoop it through to the front, draw up a loop about that long, take your left needle, scoop it from the front and right off. Okay, do a few more like that, rewind if you need to, go around. It should be up against the back of the left hand needle, but not so tight, like don't yank on it. Okay, just keep it sort of against there. Put your finger on here, scoop it through the front, slide and stretch, scoop this one off. And don't pull too hard on here because then you're not going to be able to get your needle in there. It should not be a fight. It should be loose enough that you can easily slide this right hand needle in between those two stitches without having to really force it. Otherwise, on your next row, you're going to be fighting with stitches that are way too tight. Wrap clockwise around the back, grab the right needle, pull it through the front. Take the left one to the front, scoop that stitch off. In between the stitches, clockwise wrap, pull to the front, scoop from the front with the left hand needle. Between the stitches, clockwise wrap, scoop it to the front, stretch it out, pick it up from the front with the left hand needle. I'm going to do a couple more like that. Whoops, I dropped that one, that's fine. Try again. Okay, if you need to, start over, practice until it looks fairly even and consistent. And you have a nice row of cast on stitches that looks something like this. To count them, I would just count the loops on the needle. I have 13. I'm going to keep going until I have about 20. After a while, you get a kind of a rhythm going. If it feels awkward, that is okay. All right, so there's my row of cast on stitches. Now we're going to move on to learning the knit stitch, which is the foundational stitch in knitting and which is why it's called knitting, although there are many other kinds of stitches besides the knit stitch. So as I mentioned, if you're right-handed, your working needle, which is the one that's empty at the beginning of a row, is in your right hand. And the side with the stitches on it is the left hand side. So you hold that in your left hand. So we're always working the needles, if we're right-handed, off of the left needle onto the right hand needle. And you'd reverse that if you were left-handed. To make a knit stitch, we're going to, one at a time, make a stitch into each one of these loops and transfer them over to the other needle. We're going to do it like this. Instead of going in between the stitches like we did on the cast on, we're going to scoop from the left hand side of that first stitch, putting the needle into the stitch from the left to the right in the middle of the stitch. You can see one side of it's here and one side of it's there. So I'm going into the middle of that stitch, scooping it from the left to the right and pushing it through. So I've got, you know, a little bit out of each end, maybe an inch or so. Then again, setting the end of the right hand needle on the table or under your arm, or just holding it in your hand, whatever is most comfortable, and holding on to these stitches in the left. You can see I don't hold it way down here. I hold it right up and I put my finger on the second stitch. So only this first one is loose. Okay, I want to hang on to these because I don't want them all to fall off the end. And just like that, your needle can slip out. So anchor it against your body or set it on the table, whatever you need to do. So scooping it from the left to the right, taking the yarn in your right hand, wrapping it clockwise around, grabbing the right needle, again scooping it through the front. So you've made a loop on the right hand needle. Now we're going to slide that first stitch off of the left hand needle. I've made a new stitch. My old one is right here. The new one is on this right hand needle, and I held on to this second stitch so it didn't come off too. Same thing. Now into the stitch, around the back, over the top with the left hand needle, scooping the stitch to the front with the right hand needle, and then slide it off the end. A lot of beginners will forget that sliding off the end or one of the other steps, and it'll come out funny. So there's 4 steps essentially. Into the stitch from the left, wrapping around clockwise, off the end, slip the stitch off, into the next stitch, wrap around, put the left hand one over the top so you scoop the stitch to the front, then it's finished so you can slide it off. In, around, through, and off. In, around, through to the front, and off. In, around, through, and off. Each time I slide these ones down on the right hand needle and I shift these ones up on the left, keeping control of them by using my fingers and my thumb. In, around clockwise, through to the front, and off. In, around, through, and off. In, around, and then grab the right hand needle with my yarn so it doesn't get away from me, right? I don't want to just have it loose like that. I need to have control. So hang on to these stitches and the yarn and the needle, all with my right hand. Through and off. In, around, through, and off. Now tension is important. That's probably one of the things that beginners have a lot of trouble with, is tension. And by that I mean how tight you're pulling your yarn. If you pull it too tight, you're going to find these loops are really tight around the needle, and the next time when we try and take them off of there, we're going to have to fight with it. So we don't want them to be too tight. When I put this right hand yarn around, I'm not pulling it like this. I'm just looping it, okay? and holding it down. There's plenty of play in there. I'm not pulling it really tight and hanging onto it like that. I'm just looping it in a relaxed way around, hold on to it, through and off. And I don't give it another yank after that, just leave it. You can see they're coming out nice and consistent. In, around, through, and off. Another way you'll know you're making your stitches too tight is if you're really having to fight it to get it off the end of that needle there. There should be enough play in it that you can tip it off the end pretty easily. In, around, through, and off. If it's too tight to pull it through, you're probably making it too tight. So just relax it up a little bit. In, around, through, off. In, around, through, off. You see the rhythm there? Through, off. Now I'm coming to the last one. In, around, through, and take it right off. There we go. Okay, so now all of my stitches have been put over to the right hand needle, and I have my first row of knitting. And a knit stitch looks like a little V right there. So the loops on my needle are my working loops. My first row is just underneath it, and it looks like this little upside down V like that. It's your classic knit stitch shape. All right, to do the next row, I'm going to turn this needle around, put it in my left hand, and again, my working needle is on the right. It's empty, okay? So the one with the stitches, when I'm ready to start, is on the left. And the thread is also, or the yarn is also attached, of course, to that side. Now, I'm going to start with my empty one, and you'll see that there is a little row of bumps all the way across here. That's what the back side of a knit stitch looks like. On the front, it's smooth, and on the back, it has a bump. That's also known as a purl stitch, and we're going to get to that in the next video, learn how to do a purl stitch from the front. But a knit and a purl are really two sides of the same stitch. Okay, so we've got all these little bumps. The first one is kind of sloppy. It slides off the end here. And a lot of times people will find that their stitch is twisted like this and they can't find where to start. Just make sure that your yarn is down along the front like this, and these little bumps are all nicely in a row. Okay, for the next row, again, sliding my stitches on the left hand needle so they're about an inch from the end, and putting my finger on it to anchor it. I'm going to take my right hand empty needle and do the same as I did before. Insert it to the left of that stitch. The first one tends to be loose because of course it's at the end, but that's okay. Just hang on to it, hang on to both needles with your left hand if you need to for that first stitch so that it doesn't get away on you. Then do the same thing. Wrap clockwise around the back, through to the front, and off the end. Now this is the only stitch that I'm going to say to you, give it a little extra tug because that end stitch tends to be a little loose. So give the first one a little bit of a tug. Now, above that little crossways bump, to the left of the stitch, into the stitch, around, through from back to front, and off. Into the next one, making sure you're just catching that front leg of the stitch, right? We don't want the back leg, just the front leg. In, around the back, through to the front, off. In, around, through, off. in, around, through, off, in, around, through, off. So those are the steps to the knit stitch. Just trying to keep it relaxed, but you know, not big sloppy loops. You want it to be against the needle, but don't yank on the thread. Just keep it, you know, nicely and tidy against there. Hang onto it with the right hand and take it off. Don't lose control with your left hand and slide those guys off before you're ready. So what happens if you do that? What happens if, you know, I slide it right off and I haven't knit it yet? In that case, what I can do is just take my left needle and put it back where it belongs on that side. And if I dropped it like this, I could simply get my needle back in there and pick it up again. Okay, we're going to spend a lot more time in this series on how to fix mistakes, but just persevere, and it's no problem to just start over if it gets too confusing. Never be afraid to start over when you're learning something new. You'll do it better the next time, or the third time, or the fourth or fifth time. Okay, keep going down the row, in, around, through to the front, off, in, around. Sometimes people will forget the through part and they'll end up with something that looks like this, and you can see that I've now got 2 stitches because the old one got transferred too. I don't want that. I want to make sure that it comes through to the front and off. In, around, through, off. You got to do all 4 steps to complete the stitch. Scooch these ones down a little bit so that they're not bunching up too close to the end. Through, off. In, around, through, off. Last one. In, around, through, and off. So now I have my next row. So these knit stitches are right here, these smooth ones down here, and the ones below it are facing the other way, so they have a bump. And that's how, when you're knitting, you end up with rows of bumps on both sides. The knit stitches are these ones in between, right, that look like this. And the bumps are the back side of the knit stitches on the other side. But because every time we're flipping over, we're getting something called a garter stitch, which gives you this fabric that has bumps on the both sides, and it's quite stretchy. That's your basic knit garter stitch. So if I pick this up, what do I need to do? Well, my yarn is here at the beginning of the fabric. I know that my working needle has to go in my dominant hand, which in this case is my right hand, and my fabric goes in my left hand, the stitches that are on the needle. And again, watch out that you don't have your yarn going around the wrong side. See what happens here? It looks like I have 2 stitches there. It's easy to pick up a stitch doing that. Make sure that this yarn is hanging down on the front. Even if that first bump is a little bit loose, it needs to be at the front, okay? Not around the back. That's a really easy mistake to make. So just give your fabric a bit of a tug to make sure that all of these bumps are in the same line across the front. Okay, again, sliding close to the end, hanging onto the second stitch, scoop up the first stitch from left to right, picking up just the front leg of the stitch, around, through, and off. So I'd like you to practice that, make several rows, and then we're going to come back and I'll show you how to cast off to finish your piece of knitting. Just rewind if you need to look again how to do the casting on and the knit stitch. I'll make a few more rows and then I will come back. It's best to finish a row before you put down your work so that you know where to start up the next time. But life doesn't always work like that. There's children and pets and dinner and doorbells, and life gets interrupted just when we're wanting to concentrate. So if you put your work down in the middle of a row, how do you figure out which is your right hand needle and which is your left hand needle? Well, in this case, you would look for where your yarn is coming from. So I can see that my yarn is attached to the stitch on my right hand needle. So I know that this one goes on the right and this one on the left because I'm ready to work into the next stitch here and wrap the yarn around. If I started going back the other way, I would end up having an extra pair of rows on this side and it wouldn't line up. So your working yarn is on your working needle, which is on the right hand side. So now we're going to cast off the stitches or remove them from the needle and finish off this side. But one more thing I wanted to mention, and that's how would you count rows in a garter stitch like this? Well, we know that the bumps are the back side of the knit stitches from the other side. So each row of bumps above the knit row, so you can see here we've got a knit row and the back side of a knit row. So each row of bumps is going to be the second row in the pair. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 rows completed here. That won't matter for the assignment for this lesson, but it is good to know how to do that. So to cast off, we're going to knit the first stitch by inserting the needle, wrapping around, through, and off. So the first one's knit. Second one, also knit. Now, stopping after this second one, I'm going to pick up the first stitch with my left hand needle with the point, and I'm going to put it over top of the other stitch, pulling that one through and over. So you'll see it sits around this second stitch. Again, don't make this too tight. Go into the next stitch and knit it. Then pick up the first stitch from the left, go over top of the second stitch. You can see I'm pulling it through there and off. So 2 stitches have been cast off. And continue in that manner. Knit the next one, pick up the first one, put it over top and leave that one on the right. So each time we'll be leaving 1 stitch on the right needle. Okay, knit the next one, take the first one, put it over top, and then let it go. Knit the next one, pick up the first one, put it over top and off the needle, and you're left with 1. Into the next one, pick up the first one, put it over top and off of the needle. Again, making sure to keep it relaxed, not too tight, because you don't want this last row to pull in and curve your work. Just be careful because it does tend to want to pull both of them off. Just be careful that you just put the one over and leave the other one still on the stitch. Knit, pick up, put it over. There are other kinds of cast on and cast off methods. These are just two simple ones to get you going. In the next video, I'll teach you a different cast on method. This one works great, but it's not especially stretchy. So it is not great for sleeve cuffs or bottoms of sweaters, that kind of thing. So I'll show you a different one the next time. Knitting is a lot like playing the piano. Today you've learned to play a scale, and when you learn to play the piano, then your piano teacher sends you home and says, practice, practice, practice. And that practice serves a purpose. It helps your hands to develop that muscle memory, and then it becomes more and more automatic, and you have to think about it less and less. So I'm going to give you an assignment, and it will have you practicing this knit stitch for long enough to make a hat, and that way your brain will start to make that new pathway where it knows how to form the stitches. You get to think about it less, and it becomes more automatic, and then you're ready to move on to the next step. The other thing that you have to do in piano is learn how to read notes. And when you're knitting, especially for people who learn online through YouTube videos, that kind of thing, if you don't learn to read patterns, it's hard to advance beyond the most basic projects. So just like music theory, learning to read patterns will allow you to make much more complex projects. You can't learn to play a concerto if you don't practice, 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 and learn how to read the music. So reading the patterns is like reading the music. So I'm going to show you a very simple pattern to help you to understand the abbreviations, and you will use that to make your first project. And when that one's finished, you'll come back and we will increase your skills in lesson 2. Drop me a comment if you find this method helpful, and I would love to hear from you. Okay, and at the end, we have one stitch left. And what we'll do here to cast off this last stitch is do one more wrap, like so, and put this last stitch over that wrap. Then we can cut the yarn, leaving a few inches to weave in, and pull that right needle so that the thread comes right out like that. Give it a bit of a tug to tighten it up, and there's our cast off edge. Again, you're making a new pathway for your brain. Yours probably doesn't look as smooth as this, because you can't expect to have it down and smooth in 45 minutes. That's going to take practice. So for your practice, I'm going to have you take your number 4 weight yarn and your number 5 needles, and you're going to cast on 50 stitches to start this piece of knitting for a hat. And the idea is you'll make a long rectangle, fold it in half, and sew it along 2 sides to make a square toque that's folded up at the bottom like so. It stretches along this way. This part will be wrapped around your head, and I think you will enjoy it, and you'll be able to wear something, and it will be your first knitting project, and you'll feel really good about it. For your hat assignment, as I mentioned, we're going to cast on 50. So just like we did with the practice piece, make a loop, grab the yarn that goes to the ball, and pull the two ends to make your slip stitch. Put that on your left hand needle. Knit into that first stitch to make your first cast on stitch, your first cable cast on. Swing the left hand needle around to the front and scoop it off of the right hand needle. And just like before, the rest of the stitches are formed in between the previous two. So in between those two stitches, clockwise around, through to the front, pull out a bit of a loop, scoop it up like so. We don't want to make them too tight together because you want this hat to be a nice rectangle, not really pulled in on the starting or finishing edge. So continue doing your cable cast on until you have 50 stitches. You'll see on the screen that I have a set of abbreviations. In every knitting pattern, or every good knitting pattern at any rate, it will give you a set of abbreviations at the beginning of the pattern. Those abbreviations are short forms for the stitches and methods that you'll be using in the pattern. So in this case, we're using a cast on, a bind off or cast off. To make it less confusing, a bind off is used in the abbreviations instead of cast off, or they would both be CO. So CO is your cast on, BO is your cast off, K is for the knit stitch, REP is short for repeat, and ST and STS stands for stitch and stitches. So those are the basic abbreviations you'll need for this pattern. In the pattern itself, you'll see that it tells you what materials you need for this hat, including the type of yarn and the size of the needles. And then it goes through step by step how to make the project. So you're going to start by casting on your 50 stitches, and it tells you the cast on method, in this case a cable cast on. Then, when your cast on is complete, you move on to row 1. Row 1 says knit across, and that means to knit each stitch all the way across. So your 50 cast on stitches will become 50 knit stitches. You'll repeat row 1, which is knitting across, over and over again. Then when your hat has reached the desired length, which for the average head is going to be about 20 inches. The average head's about 22 to 24, but the hat will stretch. I would suggest when you reach that size that you stretch it around your head or the head of the person you're making it for, and you can add a little bit more or stop a little bit early if it needs to be a slightly different size. Then you will cast off at the other edge and you'll have a rectangle of knitting, and by that point you'll be getting the hang of it and it will start to feel relaxing and fun. There are all kinds of mental health benefits to knitting because it's very rhythmic and almost meditative once you get the hang of it. It's a great stress reliever, and I think that you are going to come to really enjoy it. I will come back when I have my rectangle made, and I'll show you how we sew it together to make a hat. Happy knitting! Hopefully your hat is coming along nicely. When you're a beginner, it's easy to drop a stitch, so I wanted to show you what to do if you've dropped your stitch like this, and maybe even it's come right through. So I'm going to grab the last stitch that I can see that's still a loop, And I can see I've got one loose one on this side and one loose one on this side. Now the trick is to figure out which way should it go through. Now I could use a crochet hook like this. I'm going to turn this one around so that my loose stitch is on the face right there. So this is the dropped one, and it needs to go into this one. So I'm going to put my crochet hook through the back, pick that one up, and put it back on the needle like that. Making sure that I've put it through in the right direction so that in this case it has a bump. I've put it through from front to back so it has a bump and it matches the ones beside. Turning around to this side, now I've got a dropped stitch below this one. What I can do instead of using the crochet hook is manipulate it with my needles. So I'll put this stitch on the right needle, and this stitch is actually from the previous row. This one, this loose one, is from the current row. I'm going to also put that over, pick up the one behind it, and put it through. Now, where's my working yarn? It's right here. And you can see it's on the second stitch from the end. So this stitch actually belongs on this side because I haven't worked it yet. So now my stitches are picked up and I can continue. I'll show you something that might also happen when you drop a stitch. So let's say I've dropped this one and I've grabbed the one below it. If I take this one and I put it on my right needle and I put it through the other way, let's see what happens if I put that stitch from this side to this side. You can see it doesn't look the same as this one. What I've done is I've pulled it through in the wrong direction. So the bump is on the back, right? So I've created a knit stitch when actually I want the knit stitch to show on the other side. So when you pick up your stitch, you just need to make sure that you're pulling it through the right way so that it follows the stitches beside it. So I want this one to look like its neighbors with the bump. Okay, I hope that helps you if you happen to drop a stitch. When your piece of knitting is done, give yourself a pat on the back. Great job. Now we're going to put it together into a hat. So fold it together so that the cast on and bind off edges are together. Take a yarn needle and a length of yarn. I just left a long tail when I finished knitting, so I'll use that. And then simply do an overhand or mattress stitch to put those two edges together. Picking up one stitch from either side and stitching it together. come back and work this little tail in later on. When that seam is done, I'll simply continue around the other side or the other edge to sew the top of the hat together. Putting a stitch kind of in between each row. Making sure that it's fairly even so you're not getting it bunched up or gathered on one side. When the side and the top are sewn together, simply weave the end of the yarn underneath some of the stitches, hiding it in between the stitches. And maybe just to anchor it, run it back in the other direction for a few stitches. Okay, now I'm going to turn it right side out. There's not really an inside or an outside, it's just turning it so that the seamed edge is toward the inside. Fold up the bottom so that it fits comfortably on your head, keeps your ears warm. And there's your simple knit toque. I hope that you enjoyed this project and this first video in the Knitters Classroom series. Drop me a comment and let me know what you think. I'm always open to feedback. And I hope that you'll join me in the next video when we'll move on to a new cast on and the purl stitch and a new project. I'll see you in the next video. Have a super day.